every time I go and use a cloud service, there's all these different vendors, but then you sort of look under the hood and then they just all seem to be Amazon when you go more than a couple of layers deep. And I think there's something profound and interesting that's going on when it comes to how Amazon actually builds these products to make them just so relevant to so many people, and at the same time just progressing so fast with these hundreds of product lines. And to know that this business is already $30 billion a year and it's still growing 45% year on year, like that's something that people just dream about being possible. So to have Ed here as a person who's actually leading 20 countries in this space is just phenomenal. And I can't imagine there's anyone who's going to walk away from here without just not just like the actual knowledge of how to do stuff, but just having that opportunity. There's that lid blown off the roof when it comes to what's actually possible. There is no limit. Just set a bar way higher than you could even imagine and go for it, because there's living proof here that sort of thing is possible. So Ed, we're just so happy to have you here. Thanks so much for coming by, and really looking forward to learning everything from you today.
We're golden. I run Amazon Web Services business across Asia Pacific. I've been in the company, this is my 8th year now inside of the company. Ben asked me to actually introduce myself. I don't actually often get the opportunity to speak about my own personal life, but since Ben asked, I'm going to do that. I've been in tech my whole career, but to really establish my credentials in the technology business, I have a degree as well in English literature. That's what I'm trained in particular in post-colonial literature. So my heroes when I was studying and when I was at university were people like Chinua Achebe and Tsitsi Dangaremba and so on. I'm not sure if you know them. If you don't, you should. And even some of the South Africans that I grew up with, like J.M. Coetzee, who I think now has followed me over to Adelaide. I've been working for American technology companies in particular for the last 20 years. And if I had to think of an area of specialization of myself, something that I can really do and that I know a bit about, I have learned over those 20 years how to take technology and hyperscale it, because I've had an opportunity to do that for a few companies. I was one of the early employees of a company called VMware. And we took that from about $50 million to about $5 billion in an incredibly short time, in a time that no one had done before. And to us at the time seemed really remarkable. It seemed really groundbreaking. But then I got the opportunity to come work at Amazon. And again, as we built the team here in Australia and then scaled it across Asia Pacific, and then as I got the opportunity to spend 3 years working out of our Seattle business and scale other parts of our business, we never, ever dreamed, not for a second, that as soon as today, we would have customers who were consuming every single day an annualized run rate of $30 billion of technology on top of our platform. So it's been something that's been really incredible for us to see. And we've been massively humbled at the experience. Now, Ben asked me to talk a little bit. He said that there were some startups in the crowd and some young businesses as well, maybe some academics. And so he asked me to talk a little bit about how we think about building startup businesses, how we think about speed in business, and about how to create that urgency that only startups have. And I feel like a bit of a fraud in doing that. I've never run a startup. And similarly, Amazon today is over 600,000 people. So we're quite a big business. But the reality is, we do think a lot about building startups. When I was living in our Seattle business, I used to, every now and again, be invited to come and present at the new hire. So every 2 weeks in our Seattle business, we take on hundreds and hundreds of people. And they all come together in this building called Arizona. And a few of us go and talk to them, welcome them to Amazon, and talk to them a little bit about what it's like working inside of our business. And I remember, unfortunately, our founder and CEO, Jeff Bezos, he can't make it there all the time. And so they open with a video from Jeff. And Jeff talks about what he thinks is unique about our business and what he thinks is the recipe that drives the speed inside of Amazon, the speed at which we build businesses, the speed at which we incubate new things, the speed at which we innovate. And what he says is the uniqueness of the business is that it is the intersection of three things. And none of those things individually are unique. You're going to find people who are customer-centric in a lot of companies. You're going to find people who have long-term thinking in a lot of businesses. You're going to find people who really think deeply about how they affect the rate of innovation inside of their organization in numerous companies. But I do believe with Jeff that what is unique about Amazon is that seldom do you find the intersection of those three things, this idea of customer centricity, this idea of long-term thinking, and then finally, this absolute requirement on everybody in the company, all 600,000 people in the company, to invent things on behalf of our customers and to constantly iterate in the face of customer feedback. So let's think about each of those things for a second and what they could mean to your business. We take this notion of customer centricity. On the one hand, it's an idea that you should be good to your customers, right? It's a pretty simple idea. I remember, so every 2 years, as one of the leaders inside of Amazon, I actually get to go and, I'm required to go and work in a call center. And the last time I did it, I was in Arizona. It was a call center for our retail business. And they don't let me just take calls from customers on my own. I need to be managed. And so I was paired up with somebody who'd been doing it for a long time. And she said to me, because she could see that I was a little bit nervous. And she said to me, don't worry, Ed. All you have to remember is whoever calls in, when you're talking to them, you need to trust them as if they were a really, really good friend of yours until they give you a reason not to. That's great advice, right? And if you think about that as something that you can universally apply to the relationships that you have with your customers, I'm going to suggest that it would shape a lot of the interactions in the way in which your businesses are going to function. But there's actually a deeper meaning here. There's actually something much deeper in this idea of customer centricity. And if you look at the quote behind me from Jeff, he really touches on it. There's few things in life that I've found that are universally true for a long period of time. There's a few things you can say in your business that are going to be universally true for a long period of time. But there are some things. Let me give you one as an example. Customers always want lower prices. I find that to be fairly universally true. You can bet your business model on that. Here's another one. Customers are always beautifully, wonderfully dissatisfied. Totally true, and it's going to be true today. It's going to be true to next year. It's going to be true 10 years from now. What you build for customers today that absolutely delights them will bore them tomorrow. It will become the norm tomorrow, and they will say, what have you done for me today? And if you think about that, you can actually build a business model around that. Because as long as everything then in your company relies on that and responds to that and says, okay, well, if we are guaranteed that customers are always going to be dissatisfied, we can make sure that everybody is harnessing that dissatisfaction and is working to invent things on behalf of our customers, constantly improve the customer experience and take ownership of that improvement. And as long as we're doing that, our business is going to move forward. And so I would suggest to you that we have a $160 billion business that is fueled by that one premise. And you can bet a business on that. Now, it's not the only way that you can drive innovation and you can drive improvement in customer experience. There's other models which are totally valid. Some companies are competitor driven, right? They look at what their competitors are doing and they follow it as quickly as they possibly can, or they acquire innovation into their business. Totally valid business model. There are a lot of huge successful companies that do that. Other companies like to invent. They think that they're the experts in everything or in anything. And they take the thing that they're expert at and they invent it in the best possible way they know. And then they come out to the market and they say, ta-da, look what I've built, in the hope that someone's going to buy it. Totally valid business model. You can probably think of companies right now that have that business model. It's just not ours. We base our business on this idea that you invent things your customers are going to care about, that you listen to your customers and you iterate based on customer feedback. And if you do that, you can build really large, successful companies. What else? We said this idea of long-term thinking, and I think that's a pretty simple one. If I asked you to do something and I said, hey, get it done for me today, or get it done for me next week, or next year, or sometime over the next 10 years, the way in which you then go and respond to my request is going to be totally different. The sorts of problems that you're going to be willing to take on, the sorts of opportunities that you're going to be willing to think about are going to be really, really different. It also impacts the models that you start to build within your organization. We want to be patient on the strategy. We want to hold the strategy for long periods of time and continue to work on it. But it also means we want to be impatient on the tactics that are finally going to inform that strategy and are finally going to help us get there. And it's an interesting balance. And you have to be able to recognize that in your business and work out how you're going to do that. But I would suggest that being patient on strategy over long periods of time is probably going to be best for your business. It's probably going to create the right sorts of behaviors inside of your business. And then there's this third thing, right? So we spoke about this intersection of three things. We spoke about customer centricity. We spoke about this notion of long-term thinking and how we want to be patient on the strategy. We want to be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time inside of our business if we believe that it's going to be the right thing for our customers, because we always want to be affecting the customer experience. And finally, there's this idea of innovation, that we want to optimize for innovation, that we want to make sure that everybody in our company is required to somehow affect the customer experience. It doesn't matter if you build new products, if you build new businesses, if you build new processes, if you find some little tool that you want to build inside of the organization, as long as you're doing it because you want to take ownership of the customer experience. You want to find some way of positively affecting the customer experience. And my experience is that it's not enough to just decide one day that innovation is a good idea. It's not enough to say, hey, we're going to be an innovative company, that innovation is important to us. Innovation is in our DNA. Really, I have very, very little patience for those sorts of ideas. What I think is more important is to be completely deliberate about the way in which you can affect the pace of innovation inside of the business that you're setting up. And it can be done. I really, really believe that you can be deliberate and that you can be really, really conscious. And you should ask yourself the question, what are the levers that I'm going to pull inside of my business to affect the pace at which we innovate? Inside of my company, we think there's four things. Now, bear in mind, we don't have the monopoly on innovation. This is what works inside of my company to affect the rate of innovation. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try this. I really recommend it as a recipe for innovation, but it's certainly not the only way. That would be terrible of me to suggest that for a second. But if we put it as a formula, we would suggest that inside of Amazon, there's four things we look at to affect the rate of innovation. First of all, how do we build organizations? What are the organizational structures that are going to allow people to feel like they can innovate? And then technology matters. We're a technology company, but I would suggest today you would be hard pressed to find any organization that wasn't a technology company. I just had a tour of this remarkable business, and technology is everywhere. And so if technology is everywhere, how do you make sure that when you hire builders into your organization, they have the technology constructs that are going to allow them to build? Because if you don't, they're going to go. They're going to get frustrated, and they're going to go and build somewhere else. So technology matters. The other thing is this concept of mechanisms. I'm not going to go too deeply into that right now. I'll come back to that. But we basically believe that you should never rely on the good intentions of people to make predictable things happen. People are well-intended. I don't know what it's like here at the university or in your businesses, but I'm willing to bet that it is full of well-intended people, and Amazon is full of well-intended people. But good intentions don't drive outcomes, they don't drive change, and they certainly don't drive predictability. Something is wrong in my business. We all go walking into a room, we have a meeting about it, and then we decide something is wrong, we diagnose the problem, and we leave the room. What just happened, right? A whole lot of well-intended people walked into the room, and a whole lot of well-intended people left the room. Nothing has changed. And so if good intentions don't drive outcomes, what do? And I would suggest mechanisms do. And then finally, culture matters. The culture that exists inside of organizations is hugely important. So let me break these down for you for a second. What do I mean by mechanisms? If good intentions are not the way in which you can affect predictable outcomes and somehow then affect the rate of innovation inside of your organization, I'll take you back to the Japanese auto industry, massively successful in the 70s and 80s, and they're thinking about lean manufacturing. How can I affect the quality and the speed of innovation and the quality of the products that I'm delivering? And if you think about their production lines, they introduced this concept of the and-on call. That if you are working on a production line and you see a problem with anything going through that production line, you can pull the and-on cord. And when you pull the and-on cord, the whole thing stops. That's a mechanism, right? I see a problem. There is something I can specifically do, and it gives me this very, very predictable outcome, which I can then go and take action on. Inside of Amazon, we've slightly evolved that idea. And the way we think about a mechanism is that we have a set of inputs. It could be something as basic. Let me give you an example. Every month with my team, I do a review. And we go through a deck of metrics. I'm talking about probably 50 pages of metrics and data related to our business. And we invite a large extended team from across the business at all levels to come and participate in this review. And we can go anywhere we want. We can go as deep as we want in any of these metrics. We think deeply about them and we talk about them. Now, when I started in my business here in Asia Pacific, I moved here a year ago. The first one we did, it didn't feel very good. Nobody really understood it. People were a bit uncomfortable by the process. We didn't really have a rich set of metrics. But each month, we got better at it. We got more comfortable with it. We learned how to get more out of it. And so what's actually happening there? Then this is a basic mechanism. What's actually happening there? We've got a set of inputs, right? Confused people. People who are not all working on specific things. People who don't all understand the value that's happening all around them from other teams. They come into the mechanism. We have this mechanism, which is the participation in the review of the metrics, the opportunity to do coaching, the opportunity for role play, the opportunity for review, and so on. And what comes out of the mechanism? A bunch of people who are all aligned on a set of things we got to go get done. That's a basic mechanism. But what's important about this mechanism is that we then go back and inspect, and we audit it, and we improve it over time. There's lots of mechanisms inside of our company. The way in which we drive innovation. If you want to build a new product or service inside of Amazon, you have to participate in the working backwards process where you write the press release as if that product was being released that day. And in that press release, you talk about the benefits to customers. You have quotes that you've made up from customers saying, here's how it has changed my experience and made my life better in some way. Because we want to invent things that our customers care about. Well, that working backwards process, the press release and the FAQ that goes with it, that's a mechanism. It's a mechanism designed to make sure that we innovate based on customer feedback. We could provide lots of examples of mechanisms that we use in our business. The other thing we said is going to influence the speed of innovation is organizational structure. And I'm sure you guys think about that a lot. When we think about it, at its most basic idea, we think that when you build teams, when you organize inside of your company, you should optimize for speed. Because speed matters in business. And it's more fun as well. You'll attract more people. But that does come at a cost. What you end up not optimizing for, which I've seen so many organizations do, which is, I believe is a major mistake, is you can't optimize for communication, especially for functional communication. If you do that, you're not going to get speed. And so we're willing to give up this idea of communication. And instead, what we do is we build small teams that are cross-functional, that have all of the horsepower required inside of that one team to solve whatever problems it is that they're looking to solve. And that's super, super important. We call them two pizza teams because the idea is that they can actually sit around a table, be fed by two pizzas, and have the conversations that are required within that one team to solve whatever it is they need to do. And my company has thousands and thousands of these two pizza teams getting on with whatever problem it is that they're looking to solve. Each one of those teams has a single-threaded owner. Everybody that's required in that team to solve the problem works for that person, cross-functionally. Now, every organizational structure comes with a downside, right? And what you have to do is you have to think, what are the potential downsides of organizational structures like this? Duplication. I'm going to have teams who build the same thing. What about when teams can't resolve things between them? Right? I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and you know something? We're going to argue about who should be doing it and who's doing it best. What about dependencies? There is a dependency from my team to something from that team. And the way that you deal with that is mechanisms. You build mechanisms in which teams can fund resources on other folks' in other folks' teams to get stuff done. You have to be completely comfortable with ideas like escalation in order to get things really quickly resolved by people who are right a lot, by people who have high judgment. So you can work out ways to deal with suboptimal things that come from any organizational structure. And then when we start to move into the world of technology, obviously when you build small teams that are cross-functional, that are highly empowered, you can see how ideas like DevOps start to become really important. Inside of my side of the business, for example, Amazon Web Services, we actually build individual products, these building blocks, these technology building blocks that a lot of the world of technology that you use every single day is built on. Each one of those services has an owner, it has its own P&L, it has all of the people inside it required to invent the service, to iterate on that service in the face of customer feedback over long periods of time, and to operate that service. You know, Bill Vance, the guy who runs all of our storage and streaming businesses, and this is a big, big business. You can imagine how much storing and streaming around the world Bill Vance's team does. You know, he tells me he's sitting at home on the couch and he's watching Netflix, and if he sees any buffering, he looks at his pager because he's part of the team that's operating the things that they invent and that they iterate on every single time, every single day. Organizational constructs really matter, and you should think deeply about them. Technology matters as well, right? The world of dependencies, the world of large monolithic application stacks, the world of having to wait for any type of resource. That is not a world that's going to attract people who want to come and build. And at Amazon, we want to optimize for builders. We want to make sure that we hire builders because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you hire builders reliably, they're going to want to come and build inside of your organization. And so you need to make sure that you have a technology stack that's specifically built to allow them to do that. And the key there is this idea of service orientation. That not only does the world of technology need to exist as a set of API-driven services that you can call on and bring together to build all sorts of things that are going to affect the customer experience. But they also need to be delivered like a utility. They need to be there on demand, in seconds, with mouse clicks or API calls, whenever people need them. Because if they're not, the builders that you're trying to get into your organization, they're going to go and build elsewhere. I know that to be the case. So the platform that Amazon.com and every other piece of Amazon is built on has been turned into a business, has been turned to my side of the business, which is Amazon Web Services. But the reason we built it remains the same. We built it because that's the platform that people want to come and innovate on, and that the way in which technology constructs used to exist just weren't going to cut it, especially in a world of digital transformation and in a world of internet-driven services. So the final thing, and we didn't have a slide on this, that we mentioned was culture. How do you think about a culture that is going to affect the rate of innovation? And you know, I think about a letter that Jeff wrote to our shareholders just a few years ago, where he said he believes that Amazon today is the best possible company to fail at. Now, we're not looking to fail. We're looking to build really successful businesses. You know, it's part of being customer-centric that you can build large, long-term businesses that your customers can bet on and that make great business sense. But the reality is, you need to start a lot of businesses to really see massive successful ones. You know, if we look across Amazon as an organization today, we have our consumer business, we have our Prime business, we have a successful digital business, we have Amazon Web Services, we have a growing advertising business. And all of those started off really, really small, because inside of our organization, culturally, I believe there's certain things that we do that allow people to innovate. There is no stigma attached with failure. You can decide to go and build something at any time. Mechanisms exist by which I can go and build them. I can write a PR FAQ and I can say, this is a business idea, but culturally, it only works if instead of having the institutional no, you have the institutional yes. I'm fairly sure that if I wrote a PR FAQ saying, I think our customers need this, and I took it to my CEO, Andy Jackson, and his team, first of all, I know I'd get the meeting, as would most other people, right? He's going to listen and review it. And he's not going to say no. He might say, go away and improve it. Go away and change it. But you're not going to get that institutional no. You are going to get an institutional yes. Have a go. Give it a chance. When they think it's good, they have high standards on what they do and don't think is good. But I think that's really, really important. Culturally, we also want to be data-driven. If I walked into a room inside of my company and I said, you know something, I think we got a problem. I can see there's an issue there. I got a lot of experience in this area. Let's go do this. I would look over my shoulder and there would be nobody there. There would be nobody there. But if I went into the same room and said, look, customers are telling me that they're unhappy about something. I've listened to them. I've met with lots of them. I have anecdotes which suggest that we could be doing something differently. I've then gone and looked at the data, and I've looked deeply at the data. And what I think we should do is we should run a set of experiments. And based on feedback from customers on the experiments we run, we should decide how best to move forward. Culturally, I would look over my shoulder and everybody would be behind me. Everybody would be saying, yes, how can we help you be successful in affecting that customer experience? And that's a culture that you just build up inside of your organization. Super important. So those are some of the ideas about the company. These are, because Ben asked me to talk to you a little bit for those of you who have young companies, these are some of my ideas about what I know, which is about how to build hyperscale technology companies. You know, having had the privilege of doing it a few times. First thing I'd say is you got to know who your customers are. And that sounds like such a mundane thing to say. It sounds so obvious. But if you think about, let me tell you about my experience inside of Asia Pacific. I don't have one set of customers. I have a group of customers which are enterprises, large enterprises. They have huge amounts of technical debt inside of their organization. They are terrified at this idea of digital disruption. And yet the reality is that in most of them, there's this massive frozen middle, which, while being terrified, thinks that the way to deal with that is to hold on till retirement, or in some way hope that the threat of digital disruption is going to go away or not affect them. I have to think about those customers, and I have to work out how to make those customers successful. I have a whole different set of customers, which are software companies, where the CEO is being told by his or her board, I want you to move away from selling software licenses. I want you to move to a world of managed services. And then finally, I want you to think about how you're going to deliver multi-tenant SaaS for your products all over the world. And they're thinking, how am I going to do that? I have other customers who are the world's most successful digital companies. Customers like Grab in Southeast Asia, the Uber of Southeast Asia, or Ola, the Uber of India. These are my customers, and I have to think, how can I affect their experience where technology is coursing through their veins, where they built their businesses on top of technology. And so they're thinking, how am I going to harness the mega trends that are coming in technology to fuel the next wave of growth inside of my business? And then I have this huge swathe of customers who I'm never going to talk to. Zero-touch customers who will just come to my website, start using my services, and who I'm going to think about digitally acquiring and digitally nurturing in some way that's going to localize the experience for them and make me think I'm thinking specifically about them. Now, I could find other sets of customers. I could think, well, are there other customers that I'm missing out on here? But the word of warning I would have to you is it's only useful creating additional segments of customers if you are highly convicted that those groups of customers actually behave differently. If it's not, then you're just going to be adding cost and complexity to your business. But I'm convicted that I have these groups of customers that do behave differently. And if I set up my business to address each one, then I can get a lot better at affecting that customer experience. And if I can affect that customer experience and make those customers absolutely delighted, in the fullness of time, at some point in the future, which I'm not going to worry about today, the output of that, the ultimate proxy for customer happiness, is going to be revenue. They're going to enjoy using my utility platform. So know your customers. And one of the reasons you really need to know your customers and to segment your customers is because I believe that tactics are super important, and that's how you're going to inform the strategy that you have, that strategy that you're going to be patient on for long periods of time. And what I mean by that is, for specific customer segments, you have to build a set of specific tactics that are going to make those customers successful. Because that's what we want, customer success. We have to believe that our success is going to come as a function of the success of those customers. Otherwise, you're not going to be a customer-centric business. And so if I'm telling my team, well, for our enterprise customers, what are the set of tactics we're going to develop to make those customers experience? What I don't want is people saying, well, I got a lot of experience in this. Here's how we make those customers successful. What I do want is to develop hypotheses, to run a bunch of experiments, to get feedback from customers, or to actually witness success from customers, and for the most successful ones, to scale them. That's how we decide on how to affect the customer experience in any part of our business. And that's how you develop tactics that are successful over time. It's really, really important that you think like that. But as you do that, what's important is you don't do what you can't measure. Really, really critical, right? There's no point in me developing a hypothesis about something that might or might not be successful for my customers and help my customers grow their businesses, if when we then go and test that hypothesis, we haven't said, well, first of all, what are the inputs and outputs that we're going to measure? And then we measure it over a period of time, let's say 12 months. And we say, okay, at the end of that period of time, we need to be ready at the beginning to do one of two things. We need to be ready to say, hey, that didn't work. I'm totally comfortable with that. Or, which is just as difficult, and by the way, if it didn't work, stop it, right? Don't do things that don't work. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it isn't. Or what's equally hard, are we ready, if that does work, to be wildly successful? And having that mindset from the very beginning, are we ready to be wildly successful? Again, it's harder than you might think, but understand your investments. Do not do what you can't measure. Be thoughtful about it, iterate, and develop tactics for specific segments of your customer base that make sense, and do it in the face of customer feedback. Super important. And even in my line of work, which is field operations, right? I have the people who run around Asia helping customers think about the platforms that are being built primarily by our development teams in Seattle. Even in that piece of the business, that set of approaches is super important. We spoke about organizational structure. In my business, the magic only really happens when you build cross-functional teams. When salespeople come together with solution architects, come together with marketing people, come together with professional services, I am always amazed at this need that big companies have to build functional silos and to build command and control structures then that work within a functional silo. And as you build your, soon to be successful in big companies, my advice to you is don't do that, right? That cross-functional teams is where the magic happens. And you then push those cross-functional teams as close to the customer as you possibly can, and you give them as much ownership as you possibly can to affect the customer experience. And then you build mechanisms that are going to allow you to inspect, to coach, to achieve some kind of alignment, to deal with all of the trade-offs you've made in the organizational structures that you've put in place. And then you evolve those mechanisms and you make them better and better over time so that you're making sure that people are getting something out of it, that it is having the right kind of effect on your business, because you will be surprised at how powerful those sorts of mechanisms can be. The other thing I'd say is it's not enough to say, I got that done. It's not enough. What's just as important as what you do is how you do it. And that I really, really believe deeply, if you want to build a great company that's going to outlast you, you really need to think like that. Behaviors matter. And so if behaviors matter, you want to be really, really deliberate about what the behaviors of successful people inside of your company need to be. So what we did was we wrote them down. It doesn't take a genius to do that. You just have to be deliberate about it and convicted that it's the right thing to do. And then over time, we evolved them. So today, we have what we call our leadership principles, which are 14 behaviors that we believe successful people in our company have. And it's an incredible thing. What would be some examples of it? Our ride along. We think that people need to be ride along inside of our company. Our ride along, yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that you're always right, but it means that for the important things, you are. And where you're not, you're willing to rethink your approach to things. That's the behavior we want. We have another one where we say we really value ownership. We value people who invent and simplify. We have one around frugality. And what we mean there is don't not spend money, but that invention happens best when people have scarce resources. So bear that in mind. And don't think, how can I add more people? How can I add more funding? Think, how can I invent in the face of scarce resources? Anyway, so we have these 14 leadership principles. It's what works for us in our company, but it's incredibly liberating. Because first of all, if you're on my team, anywhere in my organization, I can just say, look, I'm totally happy with you being out there doing whatever it is you do, as long as the way in which you make decisions, and the behaviors which you show are in line with those 14 leadership principles. As long as that's the case, we have a social contract. I don't need to worry about where you are and what you're doing. I'm totally comfortable with it. Similarly, there's 600,000 people in my company. I can call up any one of them, and I can have an expectation of them on how they're going to behave, and they can have an expectation on me on how I'm going to behave, and all of that's been predetermined. It makes us incredibly predictable, and it really allows us to be able to quickly get to what's important, which is how can we work together to start to affect our customer experience. So behaviors matter, and the other thing that matters most of all is you want builders in your company, right? You want people who are missionary and not mercenary. You want people who want to come into the company, see something, some opportunity to affect an internal experience or the company experience, and then build. You know, the number one question that I ask in job interviews is, if you join my company, what would you be leaving behind in your company that you've invented that's going to outlast you and make that company a better place? And if they don't have an answer for that, there is very little chance that I'm going to be hiring that person. Very little chance. So builders are the kind of things, the kind of people you want. So I said speed matters in business, and I'll leave you with one last thing. If speed matters in business, how do you think of a framework that you can use inside your business that is going to allow you to take really, really rapid decisions? And here's how we do it. We think about the world in terms of one-way doors and two-way doors. If I'm going to go through a two-way door, if this is a decision that I can make, and then quickly decide, I don't like this anymore, I'm going to turn around and come back through. If I have that opportunity, then make the decision fast. And by fast, I mean you don't need all of the data. Let's say I need 70% of the data. And at that point, I'm going. I'm making the decision. Really, really important, because speed matters in business, not only because it's going to help you capitalize on the opportunity, but because your customers really appreciate that kind of urgency. So think about that hard. But what if it's a one-way door, right? It's totally okay for us to sit around and say, you know something, I think the ceiling's 14 feet. How high do you think it is? You think it's 13 feet. I'll tell you what, why don't we just say it's 13 and a half feet and get done with it? Totally okay, until someone else comes along with a measuring tape, who's your competitor, and they measure it. And they say, you know something, it's actually 13.8 feet, and this gives me a competitive advantage. And so if you have a one-way door, you've got to get all of the data. You've got to think deeply about it. You've got to be massively analytical about it before you take that decision. And thinking in terms of that model sets you free, because what you'll find, I predict, I don't know your business, but what you'll find is the vast majority of decisions that you get to make in your life are two-way doors. So do them quickly, move fast through them, be scrappy if you possibly can, and I've no doubt you will see a bunch of success in your business. I hope that was a little bit useful. Just a personal plug, we're massively excited to be involved with this university and with the Incubator here and all of the startups that are supported. We would love to have deep involvement both with the university in becoming a home for some of the incredible minds that are coming out of this place and participating in the success of this part of the world. I was just telling the folks that I've now immigrated 5 times in my life, and I have a deep understanding and respect for what for these communities that have such a high percentage of immigrants in them, but also with these amazing startups that are coming out of this part of the world. So thank you very much for your time. I hugely appreciate it.